was caused by a lack of interest or because the subject was taboo. Many events relevant to the real history of the Czech and Slovak lands are connected with Auschwitz. For example, the largest single execution of Czech citizens in the whole history of the people living in Czech lands took place there. This event, which is a part of my personal life, was, perhaps, for the first time, described in my book, written in London. True enough, already in the 50s, the Union of Anti-Fascist Fighters in Prague had arranged an annual Auschwitz commemorative evening, and on one occasion, I even went there. I heard a lot about the heroic Czech communists there. There were dozens of them, as well as hundreds of other Czech citizens, may their memory be honored, who died in Auschwitz for their resistance to the Nazis. During this commemorative occasion, nobody mentioned the murder of the many thousands of Czech-speaking Jewish children who were murdered in cold blood at Auschwitz and became national martyrs, whether they wanted it or not. Nobody mentioned the fate of the Jews either. I recognized some former Jewish prisoners from Auschwitz on the podium. After the meeting, a suspiciously well-dressed gentleman approached me and asked whether I took notice that the podium was full of Jews. I did not answer. It was sometime around the anti-Semitic Slansky trials of 1952, and I did not want to provoke my fate. Later, I worked in Israel, 1958 through 1960, where I spent many hours in the library of the famous Weizmann Research Institute, named after Chaim Weizmann. For decades before and during the Second World War, he had been a leading Zionist. It could be, and indeed it was sometimes claimed, that he was a leader of all Jews. Perhaps that was the reason he became the first president of Israel when the Jewish state was established in 1948. Therefore, I read with interest his account of his leadership and of his life, as he described it in his modestly entitled Trial and Error. In the biography's index, Rehovot is mentioned more than a dozen times. I wondered how many times Auschwitz would be mentioned, considering 100 times more Jews died there than ever lived in Rehovot. To my surprise, I found that the word Auschwitz did not even rate a mention in the lifetime memories of the Jewish leader. I do not know whether this reflects a lack of interest by Weizmann and his circle, or whether the word Auschwitz was perhaps a taboo also in Israel at that time, albeit for some other hidden reasons. In 1960, I was invited to come to England to take up a position on the research staff of the British Medical Research Council. This was a sort of mecca for scientists, and therefore I was delighted to move to England. I soon acquired many English habits and became an avid drinker of tea and reader of British newspapers, favorite occupations of the English, particularly on Sundays. In 1960, Adolf Eichmann was arrested. Suddenly, in almost all the Sunday papers, the Holocaust was discussed, and the word Auschwitz was frequently mentioned. It had almost become a household word. One of my new friends, Alan Perry, a journalist at BBC, liked to discuss this subject with me, particularly when he noticed I knew more about the subject than he had ever read in the newspapers. He told me that one of the important British newspapers of that time, the trade union's paper, the Daily Herald, had not yet carried a major report on the subject of Eichmann's activities.